Welcome to the Purdue Initiative for Family Firms video series on maintaining family bonds. I'm Maria Marshall, and joining me on this video is my colleague Renee Wyatt.
In this video, Marie is going to talk to us about conflict and resolution in the context of the family business. As CPP found, there can be a very high cost of conflict, and this is also translate over into family businesses. So 85% of workers experience conflict directly or indirectly at work. In any given week, 2.8 hours of productivity are lost due to conflict. A quarter of employees have been sick or called in sick due to conflict, and the total number of working days lost due to conflict is 385 million annually. That comes out to a really high cost of conflict.
It sure does. And a lot of times we want to get rid of conflict and get to resolution right away. And that doesn't usually happen. There's actually has to be a process to get to resolution. We have to remember that resolution is actually an outcome. It's not the process itself. So we want to make sure that we are in the process and in the moment. And resolution really means that we are returning to productivity and coordination, and that we've repaired the relationships that were part of this conflict. So we want to make sure that we're moving from conflict to a workable agreement, and we're honoring the concerns of all parties. And we'll see how kind of that gets reflected in some of the conflict modes we'll talk about later. But you want to make sure that you're willing to learn, have the courage to change, and the compassion to forgive. And in the context of family business, this becomes really important when we get to a resolution.
So as we can see here, there are different levels of conflict, but where does conflict come from, Maria?
Well, it can come from between individuals, right? In a family business, it can come between the individual and the family, and it can come between the family and, let's say, the business as the organization. So you have to make sure that you're looking at conflict at all levels. We can call it horizontally and vertically, because that's where it can exist. And we can see that because conflict can come from a variety of sources. It can come from different goals, different personalities, different resources that may be allocated between the family and the business, or between individuals that are family members in the business, styles, and values.
So which one of these sources of conflict would you say is the most difficult to reconcile?
Well, I think the most difficult to reconcile are conflicts related to goals, resources, and values. Values in particular are hard to resolve. Conflicts on values are hard to resolve just because values are core to who we are. So a lot of times we say, well, opposites attract, yes, but similarities bind. And so if you have a conflict between the organization based on values, you really need to look for another organization. And in terms of goals, well, we all need to be on the same page to be able to move forward. So that sometimes can be harder to resolve because people can have different objectives and different ways to get to those objectives as well. But the two that are, I'm not going to say easy, but the two that are the ones that you can really work on in terms of trying to resolve a conflict are those related coming from personality. So let's say you take the Myers-Briggs, right, and you find out that you're an introvert and your dad's an extrovert, and that's why he comes in your office and talks all the time. Well, you can resolve those. You know that he knows you're an introvert, you need to process. He might have an agenda before he comes to talk to you, or some kind of points by email before, so you can have a good constructive conversation. And on how you deal with conflict and the styles of conflict are also easier to resolve, just because you can understand that if somebody is an avoider of conflict and you're a completer of conflict, those you might come head to head where conflicts don't get resolved, or they don't get resolved in a very good way. And we'll talk about that next in terms of styles of conflict.
So if you saw our past video from July 2017, we talked about different conflict modes, and we looked at the TKI and our question of the month results. So our question asked our family businesses which conflict mode they use. You can see the 5 on the screen. Maria, can you tell us a little bit more about the TKI and how it's used?
Sure. So the TKI is basically one of many different types of assessment modes that you can have related to conflict. So we're just using the TKI, but you could actually go online and have a different assessment, which would have similar results, similar styles as well. But the TKI is based on a continuum of assertiveness and cooperativeness, where, for example, competing is the most assertive and uncooperative, and accommodating would be the least assertive and most cooperative. Okay, so you have these different styles, and there's 5: competing, avoiding, collaborating, accommodating, and compromising. So in terms of the competing style, you would be, like I said, the most assertive and least cooperative. This is where you're basically sometimes in it to win it for yourself, or you pursue your own concerns at another person's expense. So if you've ever had a boss that doesn't like to hear other people's opinions, and his word is law, that would be a competing style, right? Where you surround yourself with a lot of people that just say yes. So you're basically using whatever power you have to win an argument. We would use this style in debate, for example. In a debate club or class, we would use this type of style. But you have to be careful, because if you have a powerful position, you're the CEO of the family business and the head of the family per se, there's a power rank, and if you're using your power to compete in a conflict, you might be getting results that are not the best for the family business.
So I can see the competing style maybe come into play if there's an emergency and a quick decision has to be made, something like that. That would be a very positive way maybe to use this competing mode.
For sure, and we need to emphasize that there is no right or wrong competing style. So thanks, Renee, for pointing that out. But yes, in an emergency, you don't have time to get others' input. You need to make a decision, and you need to make it quickly. So that would be the perfect time to use a competing style. Collaborating, which would be, as I said earlier, this would be your highly assertive and cooperative. So you want to make sure that here all the styles are being all of the agendas are actually being accommodated in some way. Although it's not an accommodating style, it's collaborative, but you're actually listening to others and their opinions, and you're trying to get it to a resolution that works for everybody. So you're kind of getting to this win-win situation. Sometimes we would say that 2 heads are better than one. Would be a style, right? And it sometimes takes a lot longer to be in terms of a collaborating style. We know that a lot of meetings, a lot of things have to happen, and sometimes we don't have the patience to be kind of in that process. This is where process becomes important. So that's where that kind of collaborating style comes into play.
Yeah, when we look back at our question of the month results, we saw a lot of people from family businesses said that they were either collaborating or compromising.
Right, and that would be what we would expect in a family business. So here we go to it's a compromising, and sometimes compromising is a style we get back to when sometimes competing hasn't worked and collaborating hasn't worked, so we might fall back on compromising, or we might just be compromisers by nature, right? We like to split the difference, right? It's you kind of feel like you're ending the conflict pretty quickly, right? And that's kind of what we don't. We don't want to be in the conflict. We don't want to avoid it. So we'll say, well, we're just going to compromise. And we might use that a lot in marriage, right? Kind of compromising to be able to get to a solution if we don't think that, we're actually get it. So everybody gives a little bit. That's what a compromising style would be. The next style would be avoiding. So this would be very unassertive and very uncooperative. And so you can think of this style as you're not pursuing your concerns nor the concerns of the other person to get to a resolution. Okay. Now it's not all bad. You're not dealing with the conflict at that time, but you might deal with the conflict later.
So we could see maybe the avoiding mode being used if we have a hostile customer that needs to cool down, and we need to cool down before we actually confront the situation.
That's right. That's sometimes why we say you shouldn't respond to emails right away. So in terms of a family business as well, you might decide, well, all the different people that are involved in the conflict need to cool down a little bit, and you need to avoid it for a little bit, and then come back to it. What you don't want to do is avoid it and never talk about it, because it will bubble to the surface again. Then we have the accommodating style, and this is where we are assertive and cooperative. And so we want to make sure that, we are unassertive and cooperative. Remember, unassertive and cooperative. And so in this type of style, you really are trying to satisfy the concerns of the other person above your own concerns. A lot of times you might find this in marriage again, or in a family business, we also tend to be accommodating, where if something's not as important to you as it is to the other person, you might just say, okay, fine, we can go with that. You have to be careful of overusing this style, because there can be an element of self-sacrifice and an element of resentment that can build up if you use this style a little too much when you don't really mean to be accommodating, but that's the style you're most used to in conflict and most comfortable with, and you might build resentments later on. So you have to make sure that you're not overusing this style of conflict.
We could also see this style maybe used if you realize that you're wrong, and so you're letting the other person get their way because you realize that you are wrong.
For sure, that is definitely a very good use of the accommodating style. So as I said earlier, each of us is capable of using all 5 conflict handling modes. So there's no right or wrong, and depending on basically your personality and the situation, we would use the different types of styles. And as a leader or a manager in a family business, you actually should be trying to flex your muscles and use all of the 5 different styles depending on the situation, knowing that in times of stress, you might fall back to one, but be able to use all of them. All of them is a really good thing for any leader in a leadership position.
So now that we've learned about all 5 conflict handling modes, can you tell us a little bit about resolution?
Sure. So sometimes we just have to realize that a resolution may not occur, right? You're not going to get into it. You're stuck in the process, and you're not going to get to a resolution, or a resolution that's going to be wonderful for everyone. Even though resolution is supposed to be about, getting everybody back into the relationship. So the resolution doesn't occur, you're not back in that relationship, and that has to be okay. Sometimes that's something we have to realize. And we have to also try not to focus too much on that final outcome and miss the chance to have a deeper understanding and that discovery. So sometimes that collaborating style gets you to being in the process, and it might take longer to reach that resolution, but boy, is that resolution going to be maybe so much better, especially when you're talking about growth and expansion and being able to have deeper values and goals going forward. And of course, you have to have an attitude of wanting resolution. So you have to go in with compassion and forgiveness if it is particularly a family conflict, right? And have that conflict, that resolution. If you're going in and you're like, well, I'm right, and I just want somebody else to apologize, that's not having the attitude of resolution and having that openness to being in the process.
So do you have a few tips maybe for family businesses who are trying to get to that resolution?
Sure. So there are some experts that say that you should shift the focus to the actual problem and not on blaming. So if you think about yourself personally, when somebody comes in and blames you for something, you get defensive right away, right? So sometimes asking, why did you do this, is actually the wrong way to start a conversation. I know for sure I get defensive when somebody asks me, why did you do this? So it's focused on feelings and not blaming. So a lot of times we would want to use that XYZ formula. So when you do X in situation Y, I feel Z. So for example, when you don't return my calls after I leave you a message, I feel like my concerns are not important, right? So you could use the same thing in a family business. When you avoid me when I'm trying to talk to you about this, it makes me feel like you don't think I'm important. So that is a good way of kind of starting to getting to a resolution, starting the conversation over this conflict.
Well, thank you so much, Maria, for telling us more about conflict and resolution in the context of family businesses. If people want to learn more about conflict and resolution in family businesses, you can visit our website at purdue.ag/PIF. Thank you so much for joining us on this video clip.
Thank you.